Alzheimer's is an indication that affects millions of people, and I mean, I like to think that us as a civilization, like we've gotten pretty advanced when it comes to medicine to an extent. I mean, what is some of the main roadblocks as it relates to therapeutics and Alzheimer's? Because it seems like there's just something in the way that just can't be overcome.
Neuroprotection, neurogenesis, and neuroinflammation. I think inflammation is a term that we've heard so much, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
as we learn more and more about the body, it seems to me like this disease, especially when you look at some of the aging countries that we're in, like the US and Canada, there's stats that show like where this, disease, the amount of cases that society is going to basically be taking on over the next 10 to 15 years. Is this becoming more and more of a major priority from what you're seeing and learning through the research that you're doing? Hey, everyone. Welcome to our latest Traded Black podcast. Thanks for checking in. I'm your host, sdales. Today, we're talking about Alzheimer's. Why? Well, there's some breakthrough research that's being taken place. This is a disease that has no cure, and not a lot of progress is made towards this disease in decades. However, that could change. Why? Well, let's welcome in CEO of InMed Pharmaceuticals, which trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol INM, Eric Adams. It's been probably 6 or 7 months, but good to have you back on the podcast. How are things?
Yeah, good. Thanks. It's great to be here. Great to see you again.
Yeah, Anthony Varrell, good to see you as well.
Good to see you.
Yeah, a lot's changed. I know you're progressing a lot on the pharma side with the business since we last spoke. One, there's basically two distinct arms of the business. One is InMed, which is the parent company. It's a NASDAQ-listed pharma drug development company, and its commercial subsidiary of BayMedica, a business-to-business supplier of rare cannabinoids as ingredients to the health and wellness cannabis industry. In a couple of weeks, we're actually going to be having on your VP of Sales and Marketing, Jerry Griffin, on to talk more about the BayMedica side. But today, we want to focus on InMed, which is the pharmaceutical clinic development company, with a particular focus on your unique approach towards Alzheimer's. But I know before we got recording, there's some promising stuff that you wanted to share. But before we dive into that, let's maybe talk a little bit about just, the developing pipeline of rare cannabinoid therapeutics in different indications. But recently, there's been a slight transition to cannabinoid analogs and small molecule drug candidates. Can you explain for our audience what the difference is?
Sure. So we initially started out about 8 or 9 years ago taking naturally occurring cannabinoids that could be found in the plant. I should point out we have nothing to do with the plant. We've never grown or extract anything from there. But there's this family of chemicals called cannabinoids, and we knew that they had significant therapeutic potential in humans. So we started developing one in particular called CBN.
Right.
And we took that down the path, looking at it in a rare genetic skin disorder called epidermolysis bullosa.
Right.
And we also were looking at it as a potential treatment for glaucoma. So we knew that the therapeutic effect was there. But what we learned in the meantime is that you can do certain changes, very minor changes to the structure of these cannabinoids, making them what we call analogs of the natural compounds. And you can enhance their potential efficacy, their potential safety. And that's really what we've turned to now, is developing these molecules, which are now proprietary to our company. We have patents on them. And developing those, in our pharmaceutical R&D pipeline. So we're stepping away from the naturally occurring ones. We're going to these more enhanced, what we think more efficacious, potentially more efficacious compounds that we've developed in-house.
So a wrong turn down the right road, glaucoma and Alzheimer's, which, I know you've indicated there's been some breakthrough research. You were speaking to some pretty influential people in the pharmaceutical industry. But before we dive into like what all that is, how that's progressing, maybe explain to us, I know we all have kind of an idea or interpretation as to what Alzheimer's is, but what is it and how it affects the brain?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I'm not sure that the broader scientific community fully understands it. I certainly don't.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you what happens during Alzheimer's, and it's typically in an aged population, is that the brain shrinks, and the cells that are responsible for, thoughts, communications, called neurons,
Yeah.
they start to die. And they die at a higher clip than what they would in a otherwise, aged population. So that's the oversimplification of it. And there's a number of factors that contribute to that. But what happens is people start to lose their memory, their cognition. They become very anxious, as you can imagine, if you're experiencing that yourself. And so there's a lot of behavioral things that start to happen that impact the patients. So, we're still trying to work to figure out what exactly happens, but I think we're making big steps now as we start to see new therapeutics such as our small molecule drug candidates, kind of get into this
Yeah.
field and start to see the effects that they can have.
Yeah.
I mean, Alzheimer's is an indication that affects millions of people, and I mean, I like to think that us as a civilization, like we've gotten pretty advanced when it comes to medicine, to an extent. I mean, what is some of the main roadblocks as it relates to therapeutics and Alzheimer's? Because it seems like there's just something in the way that just can't be overcome from a
Yeah, so
therapeutic perspective. Yeah.
a lot of the earlier therapeutic approaches and the ones that are being used now relate back to an observation that was made in brains of people who have Alzheimer's, and that is they saw an increase in what's called beta amyloid plaques. And this is a
Okay.
Right.
protein that tends to clump together and interfere with the signaling, the normal function of these neurons in the brain that are responsible for thought and as I said. So they said, "Wow, well, there's a big problem with amyloid beta. If we can clear that out, that's
Yeah.
probably going to lead to great improvement." So they specifically designed drugs to act on amyloid beta, and that's, I mean, tens, hundreds of billions have gone into that research.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
come up with what are called monoclonal antibodies, which are very large molecules that can specifically target amyloid beta plaques, and it can remove them or reduce them. What they learned, though, is once you reduce the amount of the plaque, you don't necessarily see an improvement. You can maybe
Okay.
delay the disease to some degree, but you can't stop it and you can't reverse the effects of what's already happened.
Hmm.
So the underlying hypothesis of let's get rid of that and everything will be better hasn't really played out. So there's been
Okay.
improvements and it certainly benefited a number of patients. So that's great, but it's not the answer. We've got to continue to come up with new approaches. And I think it's going to be a multifactorial approach that is going to be, something that really benefits the patients with this disease.
Hmm.
So talking about a unique approach, I mean, what is unique to the approach that InMed is taking as it relates to cannabinoids and potentially creating a therapeutic in the Alzheimer's arena?
So there's a number of things that make cannabinoids, and in particular the one that we designed, interesting. One of the big things is that cannabinoids can naturally transport into the brain.
Okay.
There's something called the
Okay.
blood-brain barrier, and it's designed to keep things out of the brain, right? You don't want a lot of stuff getting in there. You just want what's necessary. But because the body makes its own cannabinoids, every human has two cannabinoids in their body, it naturally allows for the transport of these classic compounds. And of course, you see that with things like THC, of course,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
CBD used to treat epilepsy, that's getting into the brain. So as a class, they tend to get in pretty easily. So that's one of the things. The second thing is once you get there, what are the receptors? What are you actually doing? Well, we've noticed that we have an effect on both CB1 and CB2 in a very preferential way.
Okay.
Not all cannabinoids act the same, and ours acts very differently from things like THC and CBD. So it's affecting that pathway, but we've also learned that we are affecting a whole nother pathway in the brain that's called the PPAR. And this is a common receptor throughout the body. It's targeted with drugs for diabetes, which is interesting. But we believe it also plays a role in Alzheimer's disease. So it's this
Okay.
combination, this multifactorial approach of not only trying to hit one thing like amyloid beta and saying, let's get rid of that.
Yeah.
It's hitting a number of things that will give you a myriad of effects that may be able to contribute to improving the patient's outcome.
So you announced in a release, like you're activating several receptors that you just outlined. So I guess the first question is, what's the relevance of this? And has this grabbed the attention of the medical field as to what's being produced right now?
Yeah, it absolutely has, because it's a little bit surprising. It was surprising to us to see these receptors being triggered. So the CB1 and CB2 we anticipated, and we understand better why this compound is unique from other cannabinoids and
Yep.
why it may have better outcomes. The PPAR activation was a surprise to us, but it helps explain a lot of the things that are going on. So if you look at the graph that I provided, you can see that really what we're talking about here is, the pathophysiology of the disease and what happens in the brain. So you
Yep.
have the brain in the middle there. There's really kind of four quadrants here that look at what we think we're doing. So upper left, there's neuroprotection.
Yep.
Okay.
Below that is neurogenesis. Next to that is the amyloid beta impact. And above that is the neuroinflammation.
Gotcha.
So these are the kinds of things that we are tracking with our product to see where the impacts are. So while we, for instance, know that we reduce amyloid beta in the brain, we don't think that's the most important thing that our drug is doing. We think
Okay.
it's these other things. And these other areas are being looked at by a number of companies individually, but we're seeing an effect on all of it. And so we're trying to really suss out, a lot about what the actual mechanisms are, and trying to understand what role this may play, as we go down the road towards human disease.
I think when you
And
bring up,
I know that. Oh, go ahead, Chad.
no, go ahead, Anthony.
No, I was gonna say I know that you guys had recently added David Morgan to your scientific advisory board. Can you, I guess, walk us through the significance of that, and I guess how he wound up becoming part of the business, part of the company?
Yeah, so he's an advisor, so I wouldn't classify him as part of the company,
Part of
just
the company.
to his benefit, make sure his university doesn't get upset with him. But as we go down this path, it's such a complex disease, and we're by no means the world's leading experts in this disease. We came at it from a neuroprotection standpoint.
Okay.
We saw this effect, and so now we decided to investigate it further. We're developing, a lot of with in vitro, test tube testing.
Yep.
We've done some animal models specific to this disease, which are very well known. Where Dr. Morgan comes in is, number one, he is a leading expert. He probably wouldn't call himself that, but I will. He's a leading expert in designing and figuring out which type of in vivo studies, animal studies, are going to be predictive of a positive outcome. So
Okay.
he's what we call a translational scientist. He kind of understands what we can observe in these models, and the question is then, will this translate in a positive way into the human experience?
Gotcha.
And it's very important because you can learn all kinds of things. You can do all kinds of testing. We certainly don't have the money to do all the tests under the sun. We're limited resources here, but he's helping us understand what are the specific things we should be doing now, and which ones have the best opportunity to be then proven out as we move forward into human trials.
How is he viewed, I guess, in the medical field for like neuroscience? Like, if you could maybe touch on, yes, like he's part of your scientific advisory board, but amongst peers in the medical field, just to get a better idea of who he is for our viewers, if you're in limited resources and you have somebody that's well respected in the field, is it because of what's being produced with your research that's being conducted right now?
Well, we had an opportunity to speak with him on several occasions. We introduced him to the data that we're seeing. And I think, first of all, he would not have gotten involved if he wasn't excited like we are about what we're observing. But you'd have to ask him for his opinion on that.
Yeah, I
But
get it.
certainly we are very excited about this. I think he sees an opportunity to be of great benefit to the company, to help us, apply our limited resources in the right fashion and moving forward into the right types of models. But at the end of the day, he's exceptionally well experienced. I mean, he's a leader in Alzheimer's research. He's been associated with a number of different organizations, foundations. He's very well published.
Promise.
So he's a leader in the field, and we're very fortunate to have him on board.
Neuroprotection, neurogenesis, and neuroinflammation. I think inflammation is a term that we've heard so much, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
as we learn more and more about the body, it seems to me like this disease, especially when you look at some of the aging countries that we're in, like the US and Canada, there's stats that show like where this, disease, the amount of cases that society is going to basically be taking on over the next 10 to 15 years. Is this becoming more and more of a major priority from what you're seeing and learning through the research that you're doing?
Absolutely. And so again, all the early research was on amyloid beta, and now you start to see companies looking at inflammation, looking at neurogenesis, so
Yeah.
the regrowth of these neurons, and the
Yeah.
protection. So this is starting to become a very hot topic. Again, we kind of looked at it simply from the neuroprotective, but we've learned all these other things along the way. So inflammation is good. Like if you have a disease and something becomes inflamed, it's because the body is reacting to it with immune cells to try and help heal whatever it is. So you can imagine
Yeah.
if you get a cut on your hand, it gets inflamed. Well,
Right.
that's the body recruiting help. What's bad for the body is chronic inflammation. And that's what's going on in Alzheimer's is you have this chronic inflammation that the body is responding poorly to or can't respond to. And what we're trying to do is come in and tamper down the inflammation, tamper down anything that's going to negatively impact the brain cells. And this all kind of leads to that neuroprotective effect.
It's
I
promising.
know that we've talked a lot about Alzheimer's. What else is in the pipeline currently for InMed?
Yeah, so we have a number of different programs. So going back to when we were, working primarily with naturally occurring cannabinoids, CBN was the lead. We had two programs. One was in epidermolysis bullosa, where we conducted a phase 2 clinical study. The outcome from that study was that it shows a very high potential for chronic itch. We wanted to look at a number of different things, but based on the enrollment in that trial, we primarily got itch patients. So we're pursuing potential partnerships, collaborations on the itch side of things with wound care, derm companies, people that specialize in that area.
Okay.
We also had a program 088 in glaucoma. But we took CBN, we were able to modify it and increase its effectiveness primarily in the neuroprotective space, which is at the back of the eye. And we've now pivoted that to the 089 program, which is in dry macular degeneration, which is a very, very large unmet medical need. So we're not advancing the programs that are using just CBN, but we are looking. We think there's a lot of data there, a lot of good information that could benefit someone who wants to move forward with those. So we're talking, in business development discussions on those. We're focused primarily on dry macular degeneration with the 089 program. And the Alzheimer's program. And there's some other things deeper in the pipeline, but it's really at the research stage. We're continually working to expand our IP and our patent portfolio with new compounds that may be effective in other diseases. But it's too early to really talk about those.
Yeah, I think most investors, they really want to see pathway to revenue and understand it. With that, especially when it comes to the pharma side and biotech, it's all about breakthrough research. And, one can only hope. You can talk about commercialization and opportunities business-wise, but as I said earlier, there is just an overwhelming need for this disease, and a lot of the research has just been stagnant for decades related to it with no common cure. But one could only imagine if there is breakthrough research, what opportunity that would present, right?
Absolutely. And, we're very excited about this. It's one thing for us internally to see the data and get excited. But like I said, we're not experts in the field. But then as we go out and start to talk to experts about what we're seeing, bringing them over the wall, as it were, to look at the confidential data, we're starting to see their excitement levels as well. So it kind of reinforces, what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish here. It's still a long road, no doubt, but it's good to see other people getting involved and approaching us to take a look at what we're finding out.
Without naming names, like, are there some pretty influential people that are very pleasantly surprised but very optimistic about the research within the medical field that you've spoken with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could talk about David Morgan because he signed on as an SAB member, but yeah, we've tend to do our research by identifying who's the expert in the world, in these different diseases, and then trying to work with them. So we've done that on many levels. We're going to continue to do that. But certainly, I've been involved in the pharma industry for, I don't even know how many years, 40 something years, I don't know. But you can tell when you start to get responses from the big boys, the big pharma companies, that they want to engage in discussions with you. And again, this is, we first got data on this program in November. We got more data on this in March. We're going to have more data on this in July or August. It's very relatively new to us, but to see the responses that we've been getting in terms of engaging in dialogue is very encouraging.
One can only hope, that's for sure. Last thing I want to touch on, if you've been following news from Washington, what would you make of the news from last week about rescheduling and what kind of impact, I guess, ultimately that would have on a company like yourself?
Yeah, well, I've been involved, like I said, in the pharmaceutical industry a long time. Before that, I actually was an intern with a state police force doing drug analysis.
Hmm.
Most people don't know that. I was CSI way before it was cool. Uh,
Okay.
but
What was that like?
it was very interesting. It was a heck of an education, I can
I
tell
bet
you.
it was.
But even back then, it baffled me that marijuana was a Schedule One drug, because
Hmm.
Schedule One
Yeah.
means that it is addictive, that it's physically addictive, and that it has no medical benefit. Well, you know, marijuana is not physically addictive.
No.
It may be mentally, psychologically, some people use it as a crutch, but it's not physically addictive. And there are a myriad. We've always known there's a myriad of potential uses. I mean, just glaucoma alone, that's been known for 40 years. So it was always baffling to me. So I think it's really positive progress on that front. How does it impact our company? Not really. I mean, we don't deal with any scheduled compounds. We
Yeah.
don't deal with intoxicating compounds. We are regulated by the FDA, so that aspect
Okay.
won't change. It hasn't changed. We know that pathway very well. We know what the hurdles are. We know what the risks and rewards are, and so we're going to continue down that path. But I think overall, I think it's a very positive
Yeah.
turn of events.
Well, one thing that does, I guess, benefit you is being on a senior exchange, the NASDAQ. I know a lot of cannabis investors get frustrated with a lot of these companies listed
Yeah.
on lower
Yeah.
exchanges, but I think memory serves me correctly. You've had days where you've had 100 million in trading volume, which is
Yes.
massive to say the least. But you're in a lot of ways aligned with the space with the senior exchange listing. So a big reminder, obviously, for investors. But obviously, that could benefit you in the short term if we start to see, obviously, some legislation change. But regardless, we've
Right.
seen historically just companies that are aligned with the space and being on a NASDAQ listing, the volume that's created from it is massive, to say the least, in comparison to obviously some of the American companies that are on the OTC. But listen, I appreciate obviously the time catching up with Anthony and I, and very hopeful that this research, you like to use that term, taking the wrong turn down the right road. But wow, it's incredible to see some breakthrough research is being taken place. Obviously,
Absolutely.
David being a part of your board. Best of luck moving forward, and we'll be watching this closely next month based on the latest data that's going to be revealed. But in the meantime, let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today.
All right,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Eric. Hey everyone, thanks for watching our latest podcast. What'd you all think? Is there any information that we're missing? Is there anything you want us to cover? As these industries heat up, we're getting access to more and more big hosts. So let us know the questions that you want us to ask for you. As usual, smash that like button. We want this to go viral. Click on that bell for all notifications for the latest interviews that we're doing. And as usual, let's build this community. Subscribe to our channel because we appreciate it, because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.